Sir, I think you're in the wrong seat. 5 seconds. That's all it takes for Sharon Whitlow to size up Langston Reed and dismiss his entire identity. Langston didn't flinch. He was used to this sort of scrutiny, subtle, crisp, coded. It had been following him since he was a teenager, walking through department stores in a blazer his mother had pressed the night before. He looked into Sharon's eyes. Not angry, not defensive, just present. Fully, unmistakably present. She didn't know who she was looking at, not yet. She saw sneakers instead of Oxfords, a soft black cotton t-shirt instead of a pressed collared shirt. No Rolex, no briefcase. She didn't see what was in front of her. She saw what she was trained to doubt. The words, "Not the image we're looking for," came floating back from decades ago like smoke. A hiring manager at a small regional airline had said it to him straight-faced after an interview Langston had overprepared for. He never forgot that line. Not back then, and not now. The smell of leather mixed with citrus-scented sanitizer lingered in the first-class cabin of Aerosky Flight 880. Outside the windows, Chicago Midway's tarmac buzzed with twilight activity. Langston stepped sideways into the aisle, careful not to bump the champagne flutes already set for the boarding elite. Gate C-19 had its own rhythm, efficient, quiet, exclusive. The first-class lounge just beyond it played Miles Davis's Blue in Green, and the vibe had carried over into the aircraft. Langston reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out the boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class, confirmed. Sharon didn't reach for it. That seat's been reassigned, she said smoothly, gesturing with her hand to the economy section like a maitre d' refusing entry to a man out of dress code. He offered the ticket anyway. Under Langston Reed. She sighed, finally accepting it, barely glancing at the text before giving a dismissive shake of her head. I don't see this name anywhere on the log. A low chuckle echoed from the galley behind her. Connor Dale, younger, sharper-edged, his Aerosky uniform still wrinkled from lunch break, leaned against the doorframe. Yeah, man, you sure that's not a souvenir from another flight? He joked. Langston turned to him calmly. Do I look like someone who'd fake his way into 2A? Connor raised an eyebrow. Honestly, kinda do. Seen all kinds. There was a moment, a stillness like pre-thunder. Langston reached back into his wallet and pulled out a matte black business card, handing it over. No flourish, no statement, just the act of placing it in Sharon's hand. She flipped it, scoffed. You people and your fake cards, she muttered, loud enough for the woman in 3C to hear. In row 4, Valerie Briggs had just settled into her seat with a copy of USA Today. The headline on the cover was about DEI failures in Fortune 500 companies. She looked up, her lips tightening. She nudged her seatmate, Darnell Scott, who wore a worn but proud Tuskegee Airman cap. You see this? She whispered. I do, he replied. He reached for his phone. Langston remained still. A lifetime of boardrooms and balance sheets had trained him to sit still when cornered. I'm not moving, he said finally. Sharon narrowed her eyes. Then I'll need security. Behind her, Connor pulled up the seating log on the crew tablet. Look, he said, scrolling. Nothing under Reed. Definitely looks like someone changed it. Langston's gaze sharpened. You just confirmed you altered the record. Connor shrugged. Hey, system errors happen. The lights flickered briefly as the captain's door opened and closed. Captain Hank Delaney, tall, wide-shouldered, and silver-haired, walked down the aisle with the air of a man used to being obeyed. What's the issue here? He asked, already scanning Langston with narrowed eyes. Sharon responded first. "We have a passenger refusing to relocate. Ticket doesn't match the manifest." Langston stood, not to leave, but to face the man. "I paid for seat 2A, he said, handing over both his ID and boarding pass. Delaney glanced at them. "Sir, you'll need to comply. This seat is reserved for a VIP couple scheduled in advance." From the first-class entrance, Charles and Margot Halstead stepped forward, impeccably dressed, each holding champagne flutes. Platinum Aerosky medallion tags gleamed from their lanyards. Charles smiled benignly. "Is this going to be a problem?" Sharon answered smoothly. "We're handling it." Langston turned toward them. "I believe that was my seat. It still is." Margot offered a polite smile. "We were told it was reassigned." Langston didn't reply. He simply returned to seat 2A and sat. Firm. Still. Not defiant. Determined. Valerie leaned toward Darnell. "This is about to get real ugly." "She tore his ticket," he muttered. Valerie raised her phone. The record light blinked. Behind the curtain, a trainee was watching. Jenna Morales, 23, wide-eyed, stood frozen in the galley. Her training manual was still tucked under her arm. She'd seen the boarding pass scan green. She remembered it because she'd been nervous about making a mistake. And she didn't. Sharon turned to Connor. "Delete his name from the log." He hesitated. "Do it," she snapped. Connor tapped quickly. "Done. Doesn't exist." In seat 2A, Langston's phone buzzed in his pocket. He tapped his earpiece. "Kendra," he whispered. Her voice came through, crisp, controlled. "Everything's logged. I'm watching the footage. Proceed when ready." Langston nodded, calm as a man sipping tea at a family funeral. Valerie's video had now been uploaded with the tag Usar Flight 880 Injustice. Darnell's video, from a different angle, showed Sharon scoffing and tearing the boarding pass in half. "You know," Sharon said, smiling without warmth, "you could have just gone to economy like we asked." Langston turned toward her. "And you could have just checked the system. Instead, you assumed." Connor leaned into the galley. "Policy's policy." Langston tilted his head. "Policy is not prejudice in a necktie." From the rear, Tessa Monroe, the security officer, finally stepped forward. Her hand hovered near her belt. "Sir," she said, voice measured, "if you don't leave this seat, you'll be removed." Langston didn't blink. "And you'll be recorded." Jenna stepped forward. "His ticket scanned green. I saw it." Sharon's head whipped around. "Stay in your place, Morales." Jenna stepped back, but not before quietly tapping her phone's voice recorder. Langston adjusted in his seat. "You're ruining this company," he said. Sharon scoffed. "It's not your company." Langston didn't look at her. "Want to bet?" A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers were now watching from rows 3 to 6. Phones up. Whispers carried. Tessa stepped closer. "Sir." "Last chance." Langston didn't rise. His voice, low but deliberate, filled the air. "They have no idea who they just put their hands on." She tore it. His boarding pass. Right in front of us. Valerie Briggs's voice shook slightly as she whispered the words, her thumb hovering over the screen of her phone. The record button glowed red. Across the aisle, Darnell Scott slowly raised his own phone. Camera trained on the 2 flight attendants standing at the galley. Their laughter, low, smug, careless, floated through the quiet hum of the cabin. Just minutes ago, the air had felt like any other pre-departure routine. Now, something had shifted. Something sharp had cracked through the usual choreography of airline protocol and polite indifference. It wasn't just one man's seat anymore. It was the collective weight of everything people had learned to keep quiet about. In the galley, Sharon Whitlow leaned closer to her co-worker, Connor Dale, both unaware, or unbothered, that a dozen passengers were watching their every move. "Guy's got attitude," Sharon muttered, shaking her head. "All dressed down like he owns the place." Connor smirked. "He probably printed that pass at home. You see those jeans?" Valerie's hand tightened around her phone. Behind them, near the curtain, Jenna Morales stood frozen, tucked partially out of view. She had heard it all. She had seen the pass scan green when Langston Reed first boarded. The beep was clean. She remembered because it was the first time she'd worked boarding by herself. She'd double-checked the name, nervous, wanting to make sure she didn't screw up on her own. And now they were pretending he was never on the list. Her stomach turned. Outside the aircraft, the sky was melting into early twilight. A light mist settled across the tarmac at Midway Airport. Inside the plane, the mood was different. Not loud, but tight. Passengers in first class shifted uneasily, pretending to read, pretending not to notice, but everything in their posture betrayed attention. A man in 3D lowered his newspaper and didn't raise it again. Langston Reed remained seated in 2A. He hadn't said much since his last sentence. His phone was back in his jacket pocket, earpiece in his ear. His fingers tapped slowly against his thigh, steady, like counting down. Back in the galley, Jenna finally moved. She stepped forward, hesitating only once. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I think his ticket was valid. I saw it scan green." Connor turned around first, rolling his eyes. "Oh, come on, Morales. You just got your wings. Don't start acting like you know how all this works." Sharon turned next, eyes narrowed. "We already told you to stay out of it. This is a matter for senior crew." "I'm just saying," Jenna added quickly. "He didn't do anything wrong." Sharon stepped toward her. "Do you want to log a disciplinary mark before your first month's up?" Jenna's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes fell to the floor, but her fingers stayed tightly wrapped around the phone in her pocket, still recording. Darnell glanced toward Valerie. "They're covering it. That's what this is." "Yeah," Valerie nodded. "And they don't even care who's watching." Connor walked back down the aisle toward Langston, glancing quickly at the Halsteads, who were still standing near the bulkhead. "We're going to have to ask you again, sir." Langston didn't move. "I've been asked." And answered. Connor hesitated. "We'll call security." Langston didn't blink. "You already did." At that moment, Tessa Monroe, the security officer, stepped forward again, her badge clipped cleanly to her uniform. Her boots made a soft tap against the carpet as she approached. "Sir," she said, her voice flat, practiced, "we are formally requesting that you vacate this seat." Langston turned his head toward her slowly. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" Tessa's brow furrowed. "All I know is I've been told there's a passenger in a seat that doesn't belong to him." Langston looked at her. Not angry, just tired. "That's not all you've been told." Across the aisle, Valerie was now holding her phone high, clearly recording. "He's not raising his voice," she said aloud, not just to herself this time. "Why are they treating him like he's dangerous?" A few other passengers stirred. A young woman in 5A looked up. An older man in 3C shifted his armrest upward, as if making space for something unsaid. Langston turned slightly in his seat and whispered into his earpiece, "Kendra." Her voice responded, crisp and calm. "Yes." "How close are we?" "The board is on standby," she replied. "They're monitoring feeds now. We just need one more moment on record." Langston nodded subtly. Behind him, Sharon and Connor returned to the galley, whispering in rushed tones. Jenna stood frozen between the rows, her face flushed. She looked down the aisle at Tessa, who seemed unsure now. The security officer's eyes scanned the cabin, catching glimpses of too many passengers holding too many phones. Then Jenna stepped forward again. "I have something," she said. Sharon turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "I recorded what you said," Jenna continued, more firm this time. "When you deleted his name. When you said he didn't look the part." Sharon's face paled. Connor let out a nervous chuckle. "Are you serious?" Langston didn't speak. He sat back, letting the tension thicken on its own. "You can't just make accusations," Sharon hissed. "I don't have to," Jenna said, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I have the recording." Valerie stood now. "I believe her." "So do I," Darnell said, rising as well. Sharon took a step back. "She's lying." Jenna didn't budge. "Then let's play it for the cabin." Langston's fingers pressed once against the earpiece. "Kendra, start prepping legal." "We're already rolling," came the reply. Tessa looked between them all. "This isn't how this was supposed to go." "No," Langston said, rising to his feet. "But it's how it should go." The moment stretched. The first-class cabin of Aerosky 1880 was no longer a place of quiet comfort. It had become a courtroom. Connor looked at Sharon. "You think he's someone?" Sharon didn't answer. Langston stepped into the aisle and turned, his voice quiet but unmistakable. "You've all had a choice to make today, and some of you just made the right one." Then he turned toward the front of the plane. "If you touch me again, you'll be explaining it to the boardroom, not security." Tessa took a small step back. Her hand hovered just above her belt. She didn't speak. Behind her, Sharon and Connor looked to each other, panic just beginning to bloom. Langston sat back down, calm returning like a tide. He whispered into the mic again. "Kendra, start the clock." And then the cabin seemed to hold its breath. "He's not moving," Connor muttered. Sharon's voice shook. "We're going to lose everything, aren't we? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Langston Reed, CEO and equity partner of Aerosky Airlines. You may continue recording." For a split second, silence filled the cabin, thick, stunned, and wide-eyed. The sentence echoed like a courtroom gavel striking hardwood, reverberating through every row, through every passenger's earbuds, through every preconceived idea of who the man in 2A really was. Connor Dale's mouth fell open, his posture slumping into disbelief. Sharon Whitlow froze where she stood near the galley curtain, fingers curled awkwardly around the handle of her tablet. She looked like someone who'd just been handed a final exam she hadn't studied for. Captain Hank Delaney, who had returned to the cockpit earlier in frustration, now stepped forward again, drawn back by the vacuum left in the wake of Langston's announcement. Near the front of the plane, the Halsteads, the elegantly dressed couple who had silently accepted the reassigned seat, remained seated in 2B and 2C, champagne flutes now untouched on their tray tables. Charles Halstead gave his wife a quick, almost imperceptible glance, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and confusion. Langston's voice remained steady as he stood from his seat and faced the cabin. The man everyone had questioned, mocked, dismissed, now stood as the only authority that truly mattered. Across the aisle, Jenna Morales, still in her trainee uniform with the safety pamphlet half stuffed in her back pocket, looked from her phone to Langston, eyes wide. She was the one who had first recorded the laughter, the deletion of the log, the comment about genes and appearances. And now, that single act of quiet resistance was about to upend the entire chain of command. Kendra's voice, as crisp as ever, flowed through Langston's earpiece. Livestream is up. Board members are watching in real time. Audio is synced with public clips. Langston gave a subtle nod, his face calm, his shoulders set. I'd like to address the passengers first, he said, raising his voice slightly. Not yelling, not demanding, simply commanding through clarity. Most of you don't know me. That's by design. I flew this evening under my legal name, with a fully paid ticket, no advance notice to the crew, no special favors. I did it because I wanted to see how we treat people who don't look the part. His gaze landed gently on the Halsteads. No offense to those of you who benefited from the mistake. I don't believe you asked for it, but I do believe you could have asked about it. Margot Halstead looked down. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. Jenna's recording played softly over her phone. Sharon's voice, sharp, dismissive. Not in those jeans. Then Connor's chuckle. Bet he printed that thing at home. The playback felt heavier now, like a confession under oath. Passengers leaned forward in their seats. Valerie Briggs stopped filming and placed a hand over her heart. Darnell Scott, seated beside her, gave a slow, steady nod. Langston turned back to Sharon and Connor. You both had multiple opportunities to pause, to verify, to ask. But you didn't. Instead, you erased my name from the log and tore up a valid boarding pass. Not because of protocol, because of prejudice. Connor started to say something, some sort of excuse, but Langston raised his hand, and it stopped him cold. You've said enough already. Captain Delaney took a step forward, his voice low, trying to reclaim some thread of authority. This is still my aircraft, Mr. Reed. Langston looked directly at him. And I'm the man who signs your paycheck. There it was. The truth laid bare. The captain's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. In Langston's ear, Kendra chimed in again. Board has approved immediate terminations. Authority is fully delegated. Langston glanced down the aisle at Tessa Monroe, the security officer. Her eyes met his. No words exchanged, but something passed between them. Acknowledgement. Understanding. You have one more move to make, Langston said to her, his voice not threatening, but firm. And you have to decide whether it will cost you everything. Tessa didn't speak, but she didn't step forward either. Sharon, sensing the tide turning, tried one last, desperate pivot. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice shaky now. I didn't know. If I had known who you were... Langston interrupted with a quiet shake of his head. That's exactly the problem. Across the cabin, a man in 6A muttered, Lord, I've waited a long time to see something like this. Someone in 4F clapped once before stopping, uncertain. Another voice called out from the back. He's telling the truth. I watched it all. Jenna stepped forward beside Langston. I have the full audio, she said, holding up her phone. Everything they said in the galley. Sharon's composure cracked. That's a violation of crew protocol. Langston turned toward the passengers again. This isn't about protocol. This is about power. Misused. Repeatedly. Silently. until someone finally said, "Enough." His words hung in the air like the end of a sermon. Valerie stood now, her voice firm and clear. "You were right to stay in that seat." Darnell followed, then others. One by one, phones still in hand, expressions solemn, voices united, not in chants or cheers, but in quiet affirmation. Langston looked toward the front of the plane. He tapped his earpiece again. "Kendra? Yes? Start with Sharon. Noted. File logged. Badge number cross-verified." Langston took a breath and delivered the words without venom, but with unmistakable finality. "Sharon Whitlow, Connor Dale, Captain Hank Delaney, you are all officially relieved of duty." The cabin gasped, not dramatically, but as if someone had cracked open a locked door in a sealed room. Fresh air, long overdue. "You are to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. You are no longer permitted aboard any Aerosky property, effective immediately. You will be escorted by ground management and security." Sharon's face turned white. Connor looked ready to vomit. Captain Delaney's voice came out hoarse. You can't just override command authority mid-flight." "You're not mid-flight," Langston said flatly. "And I'm not overriding. I'm enforcing." At the front, 2 new crew members stood at the door, summoned by Kendra's emergency rotation request. They wore crisp uniforms and uncertain expressions, realizing they were stepping into the aftermath of something unprecedented. Langston turned to the cabin once more. "This doesn't fix everything, but it starts something." He nodded to Jenna, then to Tessa, who remained by the wall, stunned but quiet. "You had a choice," he said to Tessa. "And you didn't push it too far." She blinked. "I'm not proud." "Then change." The moment felt suspended in amber, unmoving, fragile, historic. Langston's voice softened, but still carried through the silence. "What happened today isn't rare. It's just rarely interrupted." Then he stepped aside. And Kendra's voice echoed in his earpiece one last time. "Board has completed all termination entries. Your authority is secure. Legal is active. Media is waiting." Langston nodded once, eyes on Sharon, Connor, and the captain. Then he delivered the closing order himself. "Pack your things. You are no longer employed by this airline." "Pack your things. You are no longer employed by this airline." The words landed like a hammer, not shouted, but measured. Undeniable. In the stillness that followed, Sharon Whitlow's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands, still clutching her tablet, trembled ever so slightly. Connor. Dale backed toward the galley wall like someone bracing for an earthquake. Captain Hank Delaney's face turned a shade paler, eyes darting toward the passengers whose phones remained aloft, capturing every flicker of consequence. Langston Reed stood calmly in the aisle, not gloating, not grandstanding. He didn't need to. His authority came from something deeper than position. It came from principle, from pain endured and dignity withheld for far too long. The reversal happening in this cabin wasn't just about seats or schedules. It was about who finally got to write the rules. At the cabin door, 2 ground managers entered, escorted by a mid-level human resources representative whose clipboard bore the weight of final decisions. They were flanked by uniformed airport security, non-threatening in posture, but unmistakably present. "Ms. Whitlow," one of the managers said softly. "Mr. Dale, Captain Delaney, please gather your belongings. We'll be escorting you off the aircraft now." Sharon didn't move. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid it's already done," the HR rep replied. "The system's been updated. Your access credentials have been disabled." Connor's knees seemed to buckle slightly. No, this can't be happening." Langston looked at him, eyes clear, tone still calm. "You had multiple chances. You made multiple choices." Captain Delaney stepped forward, chin lifted, trying to salvage some sense of command. "I'll have this reviewed by the board. I've served 23 years without a single suspension." "And you should have known better," Langston answered, "which makes this even worse." Connor slumped into the jump seat near the galley and dropped his headset into his lap. Sharon blinked several times, her body motionless except for the sharp rise and fall of her chest. She looked at the passengers, at the cabin crew, as if expecting someone to speak in her defense. No one did. Jenna Morales stood near the rear of the aisle, holding her phone against her chest. Her badge still read, "Trainee." But today, she had done something many fully licensed employees never dared. Langston caught her eye and gave a small nod. "You're going to need to report to the forward galley," one of the new crew members said quietly to Jenna. "You've just been promoted." Jenna blinked. "Me?" The HR rep nodded. "Effective immediately. Full status. Supervisor recommendation approved by the CEO himself." Passengers began to murmur, then clap. Not a thunderous applause, just a few soft, deliberate hand claps. A middle-aged man in 4C stood and said, "Finally, someone did the right thing." Tessa Monroe hadn't moved from her position near the wall. Her eyes flickered toward Langston, then to the escort team now standing beside the terminated employees. "I got caught up in it," she said quietly, as if confessing to no one in particular. "I didn't pull him out, but I didn't stop it either." Langston turned toward her. "You didn't push it past the point of no return." Tessa met his eyes. "That doesn't mean I'm proud of what I did." "It means you have a shot to do better," he said, "and you're going to take it." She nodded slowly, shame and determination sharing space on her face. "I want to learn," she added. "You will," Langston replied, "but not here. You're being reassigned to a different base. You'll start retraining next week." "Under who?" she asked. Langston tilted his head toward Jenna. "You'll be shadowing her." Tessa looked startled, then her face softened with understanding. "I'll be ready." Langston nodded once, then turned back to the 3 former crew members. Sharon had gathered her tablet and scarf. Connor had grabbed his headset and bag. Captain Delaney carried nothing, just a stoic face and an unspoken storm brewing behind his eyes. As they moved slowly down the aisle toward the front of the cabin, passengers stepped aside. No one jeered. No one cheered. But every phone remained up, lenses steady, the moment preserved. Near the door, Langston stopped them. "You don't need to know who I am to treat me like a person. All you needed was to believe what was in front of you." Sharon looked away. Connor kept his eyes on the floor. Delaney paused for a beat, then stepped off the plane without a word. Langston remained by the entrance as the new crew entered, taking quick inventory of the cabin's condition. One of them approached Jenna and handed her a fresh set of wings. She stared at them, speechless. "Seriously?" "Seriously," the crew member said. "You earned it." Langston turned back toward the passengers and raised his voice slightly, not to address the room as a CEO, but as a human being. "This flight will be delayed. We apologize. But when it continues, it will do so with a crew that respects the dignity of everyone on board." Another round of soft applause followed. At the rear, Valerie turned to Darnell and whispered, "He didn't come here to fire people. He came to fix something. Darnell nodded. And he brought receipts. Langston's earpiece buzzed again. Kendra, he said softly. We have something. Connor admitted in his exit interview that this wasn't the first time. Langston's jaw tensed. How many? 3 that he remembers. 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in Phoenix. All passengers of color. All first-class tickets reassigned or erased from the manifest. Langston stared at the ceiling for a long breath. This isn't just about one crew, Kendra continued. It's a pattern. Systemic. Then we don't stop here, Langston said. Audit every base. Pull every manifest. Scrub every complaint. Already in motion, she replied. And the board agrees. David Lee's team is mobilizing. Sarah's preparing a public statement. James wants to brief the Department of Justice by morning. Langston stepped away from the front of the cabin and walked back toward his seat. Passengers parted again, quietly watching him pass. No one spoke. No one needed to. Near 2A, Jenna stood waiting. Is there anything else I should do? Yes, Langston said gently. Make this cabin what it was supposed to be. For everyone. She nodded, determination now replacing her nervousness. Langston turned to sit again, lowering himself into the seat they tried to strip from him. He leaned back, exhaled deeply, and said into the earpiece, "Let's clean house." From the galley, Valerie watched the door close behind the terminated crew and whispered to Darnell, "This isn't just one flight." "No," Darnell said, tapping the edge of his phone. "It's the first one that finally turned around." Then Langston's phone vibrated one last time. Kendra's voice came through the line, steady and sharp. "There's more. Connor just admitted this wasn't the first time. This isn't going viral. It's going accountable." Langston Reed's voice was quiet now, no longer pitched for authority or confrontation. It didn't need to be. The echoes of what had just happened still lingered like engine hum after shutdown. The seats were the same. The air still buzzed faintly from the recycled ventilation. But the cabin wasn't the same. The plane wasn't the same. Something sacred had cracked open and changed the air between strangers. A new crew was settling in. They moved with the grace of those briefed under pressure, eyes aware of history being made mid-flight. Passengers watched them carefully, not with distrust, but with a kind of protective reverence, as if no one wanted to see the new beginning tainted. Langston remained seated in 2A. The seat was his, now indisputably so. No one questioned it. No one cast a glance suggesting otherwise. This time, he had taken it back on behalf of everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong where they rightfully were. Above him, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Soft overhead lights shifted the cabin from tension to transition. Jenna Morales walked slowly down the aisle, her steps careful, professional, but slightly unsure. A brand new set of wings was pinned above her chest, handed to her just moments before by the ground supervisor. She had almost dropped them when they were placed in her palm. Now they rested there like a promise fulfilled too soon. Too big. She stopped at Langston's row. "Can I offer you a drink, sir?" she asked. Langston looked up at her. "Not, sir," he replied. "Just Langston," she smiled. Then, "Langston, can I offer you anything?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe a ginger ale. No ice." "Coming right up," she said, and walked off, shoulders a little more square than when she'd arrived. In the rear, Tessa Monroe stood against the wall near the galley. She hadn't spoken much since the handoff, but she watched Jenna closely, as if memorizing her rhythm. She was no longer in uniform, at least not in any functional capacity, but she stayed on board per Langston's orders. Her reassignment papers were already being drafted. She had opted to stay and observe. When Jenna passed by her again, she leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Jenna looked at her. "We've all got things to unlearn." Up front, Valerie and Darnell sat in their seats, scrolling through their phones. Their earlier videos had crossed over 100,000 views. They were already being picked up by smaller media accounts. One article headline read, "CEO reclaims seat and airline mid-flight after racial profiling." "This is going to be in every news cycle by tomorrow," Darnell murmured. "Good," Valerie said. "Let them talk. Let them look." Langston's earpiece buzzed. "Kendra," he said. "We're fully engaged," she replied. "David Lee is heading up compliance, Sarah is preparing the public statement, and James wants to issue a joint memo to the FAA. All bases are under review as of this hour." "Compensation?" he asked. "Already underway," she said. "Every passenger on board will receive a direct apology, a full refund, and a permanent upgrade to platinum status." Langston gave a soft nod. "Good. Make it real. No press release language. Just truth." Kendra paused, then added, Jenna, is being recommended for DEI mentorship leadership." "She earned it." "Linda too," Kendra said. "You gave her a second chance. She's enrolling in full retraining." Langston looked down the aisle. Tessa, now just Linda again, stood quietly, arms crossed, watching everything. "Pair her with Jenna," he said. "Let her see what courage looks like from the other side." Kendra responded without hesitation. "On it." The aircraft had leveled off now. Outside the windows, clouds gave way to dark blue sky, speckled with pinpricks of stars. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted into calm. Langston reclined slightly, his body finally relaxing into the seat he had fought to defend. Not because he needed it, but because of what it stood for. He stared out at the curve of the earth beyond the glass, his reflection staring back at him. He remembered being 25, suit pressed, resume perfect, walking into that regional airline's HR office. Rejected after 15 minutes with the words, "You're not quite the image we're looking for." That rejection had stayed with him. It hadn't broken him. It had refined him. Now, decades later, he was cruising at 32,000 feet over the Midwest, not in a chartered jet, but in a public commercial flight, a plane he partly owned. And in that moment, he didn't think about share prices or board seats. He thought about every kid on the South Side who sat in the back of the bus, stared up at the front, and wondered if they'd ever get to lead. Jenna returned with his drink, hand steady now. "Here you go," she said, placing the ginger ale on his tray. "Thank you," he replied, meeting her eyes. She didn't move right away. "You changed more than just this flight." Langston smiled faintly. "That's what leadership is, not hiding when it gets hard, showing up anyway." She nodded and moved on. Elsewhere in the cabin, an older woman tapped Langston gently on the shoulder. "My son went through something like this last year. No one listened. Thank you for not backing down." Langston turned to her. "Tell him things are changing." The man beside her added, "Because of you." Langston shook his head. "Because people finally stopped letting silence speak for them." The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reyes. We are now cruising at 32,000 feet. Thank you for your patience today. On behalf of the new crew and Aerosky Airlines, we appreciate your trust, and we thank Mr. Reed for personally restoring it." A few soft claps rose from the cabin, not performative, not loud, just steady and real. Langston closed his eyes briefly. The rhythm of the engines lulled the plane into a quiet momentum. Kendra's voice returned. "Media's asking for a quote." Langston paused, then answered with calm finality. "Tell them I didn't come to make noise. I came to make change." From a few rows back, a passenger whispered, "This flight should be a movie." Another replied, "Nah, it should be policy." Langston turned back to the window. In the soft glow of the cabin, with his body finally resting and the air around him no longer sharp with tension, he thought, "This is what legacy feels like." And at 32,000 feet, he flew forward into it. "This flight will be delayed. We apologize, but when it continues, it will fly with a crew that respects the dignity of everyone on board." Langston Reed's final words before takeoff weren't spoken like a CEO. They were spoken like a man who had waited his whole life to finally say them and be believed. As the plane lifted off the runway, the cabin remained hushed, but not because of fear. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, the kind that signals something is new, something is better, even if no one quite knows what it will look like yet. Flight 880 cut through the sky over the dark Midwest, leaving behind a gate that still buzzed with the echoes of justice. On the ground, the terminated crew, Sharon, Connor, and Captain Delaney, stood outside the terminal beneath harsh fluorescent lights, stripped of uniforms and titles. There was no applause for them, no farewell. Only the rustle of paper termination packets and the dull realization that their own systems had failed them just as much as they had failed others. Langston stepped briefly off the aircraft to oversee their formal exit. He didn't speak unless spoken to. When Sharon finally turned to him with streaked mascara and whispered, "I didn't know," he answered only, "You didn't need to." His voice was even, final. "You knew what you were doing. You didn't need to know who I was. All you had to know was that I was a human being who paid for a seat and showed valid ID." Beside her, Connor Dale stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes hollow. No more jokes left, no more sarcasm. Only the cold recognition that the moment he chose to laugh instead of verify had ended his career. Captain Delaney stood with military stillness. He said nothing. But it was written across his jaw, his down-turned eyes. He'd known, on some level, that what he allowed wasn't right. And knowing made it worse. "You're done," Langston said quietly. "Your employee records have been closed. You'll receive no severance. Your access is revoked." Rachel's voice came through Langston's AirPods. "Confirmed. Systems updated. They're locked out." Without another word, Langston turned and walked back toward the jet bridge. As he neared the terminal gate, Linda Walsh stood leaning against the wall, still in uniform, but no longer part of the flight crew. Her arms were folded. Her face was drawn tight, serious. When he approached, she stepped forward, unsure whether she had the right to speak. "You gave me a choice," she said, "and I almost blew it." Langston didn't interrupt. He let her feel the weight of her words. "I didn't pull you out, but I didn't stop it either, and that's going to sit with me." He gave a small nod. "We've all stood on the wrong side of something. What matters is what we do next." She took a deep breath. "I want to do better. I want to learn." "You will," he said. "You'll start retraining next week. Different base, new team, and you'll be shadowing Jenna Morales." Her eyes widened slightly. "Jenna?" Langston nodded. She just got promoted. Back at the gate, Jenna stood near the boarding door, blinking in disbelief. The badge in her hand was fresh, glossy, heavy with responsibility. Around her, newly arrived crew members offered quiet congratulations. A senior flight manager handed her her official wings. She held them in both hands, staring down at them like they might vanish. Langston approached her and extended a hand. You kept your head down when they told you to stay quiet, but you spoke anyway. You trusted what was right. That takes courage. She shook his hand slowly, still stunned. I couldn't watch it happen. Not again. And now, he said, you'll help lead change. She nodded, her throat tight, her eyes wet. Rachel's voice returned. Marcus, excuse me, Langston. We've got something. Brian just admitted in his exit interview that this isn't the first time. Langston's expression hardened. Go on. Connor, Nicole, and Delaney. There are at least 3 prior complaints that were buried. 1 in Phoenix, 2 in Los Angeles. Same pattern. All minority passengers, all first-class bookings tampered with, records altered, logs erased. This is bigger than bias, Langston muttered. This is systematic deception. David Lee is already pulling logs, Rachel said. A full audit begins today. Sarah's drafting a public statement. James wants to brief the Department of Justice by tomorrow morning. Langston stepped closer to the terminal window. Outside, planes taxied under sodium orange lights, the lines of runways gleaming through a light mist. Aircraft after aircraft lined up for departure, each one full of people who had no idea whether they'd be seen for who they were or judged for how they looked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He just watched the runway and whispered, "Then let's clean house." From the top down, he turned back toward the boarding area, where passengers had been deplaned temporarily during the crew transition. Many were seated quietly. Some stood, phones in hand, waiting. When Langston entered, there was no fanfare, just stillness. Recognition. One woman stood and said, "You didn't have to come yourself, but you did." Another added, "You could have let PR handle it, but you stood in it." Langston nodded humbly. That's what leadership is, not hiding behind statements, showing up when it counts. Jenna stood beside him now, her new badge clipped cleanly to her shirt. Linda stood nearby, watching, waiting for her assignment. Rachel's voice spoke again through the AirPods. New crew is briefed. Boarding can resume in 15 minutes. Langston nodded, then looked toward the cluster of passengers waiting. Make sure every one of them receives a full refund, direct apology, and lifetime platinum status. No exceptions? Rachel asked. None, he said. And Jenna? Set her up with mentorship under our DEI lead. She's going far. Jenna turned toward him. Seriously? Langston smiled. Seriously. This company needs more of you. Then he turned to Linda. You'll be shadowing her. Learn from the voice you tried to ignore. Linda's face tightened, but she nodded. I will. Rachel's voice returned, a final update. Langston, trending update, hatched Flight 880. Injustice just crossed 75,000 shares. Media's asking for a statement. Langston glanced once more toward the boarding door, toward the aircraft he had boarded anonymously, humbly, and left as a man who reclaimed not just his seat, but his voice. Let them watch, he said. We're not going viral. We're going accountable. And with that, he stepped onto the jet bridge, not just to reboard the plane, but to begin a new chapter of the airline he helped build. Not through headlines, not through slogans, through action, through consequence, through presence. 10 minutes later, Flight 880 was ready to depart again. But this time, the cabin carried more than passengers. It carried proof that quiet dignity could speak louder than rage. And sometimes, change didn't need a storm. It just needed someone who refused to move. There are stories we hear, and then there are stories we feel. This one, about a man, a seat, and a silence finally broken, was the kind we feel deep in our bones. It didn't start with raised voices or flashing headlines. It began with a quiet insult. You don't belong in first class. 5 seconds of dismissal. One torn boarding pass, a glance that carried decades of assumptions, and a man who, instead of reacting in fury, chose to stay seated. With dignity, with truth, with patience sharper than any insult ever spoken. Langston Reed didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he didn't have to. He carried the weight of every boardroom meeting he'd ever sat through where he was mistaken for the intern, every business dinner where the waiter handed the check to the white executive beside him, every subtle nod, every smile too tight, every, "Are you sure?" after presenting an idea others would have accepted on sight. And he carried it all with composure, with clarity, with grace that had been forged, not given. It could have been any flight, any day. But Flight 880 became something else. A mirror. A place where passengers could no longer pretend not to see, where silence itself became part of the injustice, and standing up, literally, meant far more than changing posture. It meant changing precedent. From the moment Sharon Whitlow looked at Langston and assumed he didn't belong, she became more than a flight attendant enforcing policy. She became the voice of every gatekeeper who had hidden bias behind a company handbook. Connor Dale became the echo of every snide remark made in break rooms when no one was supposed to be listening. And Captain Delaney, stern, seasoned, became the system that says nothing while injustice plays out under its nose. But the story didn't belong to them. Not really. It belonged to Jenna Morales, to Valerie Briggs, to Darnell Scott, to every passenger who filmed, who spoke up, who refused to look away. It belonged to the quiet resistance, the bystanders who became allies not with grand speeches, but with simple acts of integrity. It belonged to Linda Walsh, who started on the wrong side of the line and found the courage to cross it. And it belonged to Langston Reed, who sat in his rightful seat not just to travel, but to test the culture he helped create. When they questioned his ID, he didn't shout. When they tore his ticket, he didn't stand in anger. He stood in truth, in leadership, in legacy. Because Langston knew something many still struggle to accept. Prejudice is rarely loud. It whispers. It smiles. It hands you a plastic flute of champagne and tells someone else they earned it more. But when recorded, when exposed, when seen, its power fades, and all that's left is the uncomfortable truth. There is a difference between policy and human decency. One can be changed in a document, the other is changed in the soul. In the end, the names were erased, not Langston's, but theirs. Sharon, Connor, Delaney. Not because someone wanted revenge, but because justice demanded accountability. The board didn't react to pressure. They responded to proof. Real stories, real evidence, real harm. And as the plane rose again into the sky, With a new crew, new wings pinned to Jenna's uniform, and Linda shadowing the person she once overlooked, a new future took flight. This wasn't a viral moment, it was a cultural reset, midair. Langston didn't seek the spotlight. He simply refused to be hidden. He reminded us that you don't have to shout to be heard, that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is refusing to be moved, and that when people choose to stand beside you instead of watching from a distance, systems begin to change. The lesson isn't just about airlines, it's about dignity. In banks, in schools, in offices, on sidewalks, at lunch counters, and yes, in first-class cabins. Dignity is not a perk. It's a right, and the people who protect it, who restore it, who insist on it, they are the quiet heroes of our time. Langston Reed didn't come to make noise. He came to make change. And in doing so, he gave every witness to that moment a new measure for what courage looks like. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a man in a black t-shirt calmly stating, "This is my seat," and not moving, even when everyone around him says he doesn't belong. This story will echo in boardrooms, in training sessions, in policy rewrites, but more importantly, it will echo in hearts. Because in the end, the greatest lesson is this: power means nothing without humanity, and leadership is not a title. It's a choice made when it's hardest to make. Langston's legacy is not the seat he reclaimed, but the dignity he restored. For himself, for others, for all of us watching. His philosophy remains: you don't have to look like money to be treated like a person. If you felt something watching this story unfold, if you saw yourself or someone you love, leave a number 1 in the comments. Let us know you're still watching. And if you believe stories like this matter, if you believe dignity deserves a voice, subscribe to our channel, because the next story is already boarding.